Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey, welcome to episode 170 of the podcast. This is a fun episode where I interview two people, Jody Livingston and Trent, and they're student pastors. Chris leads middle school specifically. They've both led in different areas of youth ministry for a while now, and they have a podcast called the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast, and their whole goal is just to help youth leaders stick it out for the long haul, to stay, to disciple. And we even talk about that a little bit. In fact, I probably share an opinion that may not exactly line up with that, but I enjoyed the conversation. We talked about youth ministry and family ministry. Like, how do those two things relate together? As a youth minister with youth ministry, how can you partner with parents, partner with your children's ministry? So that's kind of the conversation we have, and this is going to air on their podcast as well. So it really was just a conversation between the three of us, and we just kind of let it go wherever it went. So I hope you'll enjoy this. Even if you lead in children's ministry, this might be something good to listen to get that perspective. And certainly one of the things I think we can all do is work better together. Student ministry, children's ministry, whether you have somebody leading that overall, like a next-gen pastor, family pastor, which most churches don't, or if you don't have that, like most churches, we could all, work better together. And we even talk about some ideas with that. So let's go ahead now and listen to my conversation with the Longer Haul Youth Ministry guys. Well, I'm excited to talk with Jody and Chris of the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast, and we're just going to talk family ministry and youth ministry and how the two work together. And so my context is I serve as the next-gen pastor at Community Christian Church in Nottingham, Maryland, and we kind of look at children's ministry and youth ministry as one team, and I get the privilege of leading that and have awesome staff, and so we want those two things to work together. But Chris and Jody, I'd love to hear what your role is at your churches and what that looks like. So who wants to go first?
Nick, where the heck is Nottingham, Maryland, before we jump in?
It is north of Baltimore, and literally like that specific city, Nottingham, is really, really small.
This is Chris talking, by the way. So Jody lives out in California. I'm in Atlanta, and we've had like a polar vortex hit in the last day. Like yesterday morning, we woke up and it was like 80 degrees, and no joke, this morning it was like 30 degrees. In Maryland, is it like dog cold up there yet, or what's it feeling like for you guys?
We had the exact same thing. So, and which made Halloween, which is, this.
It was insane last night. Halloween was like so cold. Like it started out like whatever, but then a rain thing came through, and then boom, like ice cold.
We must have been, I don't know, maybe a little behind that, because Halloween was great weather, 72 degrees, windy, started to get cold, but none of that, the rain, all that happened after kind of everything was over, and then woke up to this morning feeling like it was winter.
Yeah, that's nuts. Of course, we may be airing this episode later on, but anyway, that's what we do. So cool. Nick, hey, I'm Chris. Jody, you want to jump in, or you may jump in?
No, go ahead. You go first.
Say, I'm Chris Trent. I am a middle school pastor, also serve as our student pastor at Johnson Ferry Baptist in Marietta, Georgia, which is a suburb of Dallas. Been here for over 15 years now.
You're in a suburb.
Did I say Dallas just then? What did I say?
You said you live in a suburb of Dallas.
Gee whiz, I'm nervous about being on somebody else's podcast.
That's a far out suburb.
I'm 100% nervous about being on somebody else's podcast.
You have to excuse Chris. He's old.
With Jody, I don't get nervous.
Wait a minute.
With Nick, I'm nervous. Yeah.
Sometimes he, in his latter years here, his mind.
Take two, Marietta, a suburb outside of Atlanta. Hello, good grief. Atlanta, Georgia. And so there is a Dallas, Georgia, not too far from here. So that's what I was talking about.
True.
It's a suburb outside of Dallas, Georgia.
Yeah,
you guys give me a break. So
I know somebody lives in Dallas, Georgia. So you're right. That could have been what you meant the whole time.
That's what I'm
suburb of Dallas, Georgia. Something no one has ever said. No one has ever said I live in a suburb of Dallas, Georgia.
Like for real.
Dallas, Georgia basically is a suburb. one little sub, or
barely. Yeah. So anyway, so I've been here for a little over 15 years, and in youth ministry since the late 80s, early 90s, and just a product of youth ministry. Love youth ministry, and this will be fun. So Jody, what's up?
Yep, and I'm Jody. I am in California, down in Southern California. but not the part that everyone thinks of. I'm in the high desert of California. I am a student pastor here at a multi-site church, so the dynamics have changed for me quite a bit. I've been here actually not that long, a little over a year, or almost a year, almost a year. Been in student ministry 20 years, was in the Atlanta area with Chris there for 9 before moving out here and taking on this role. And so I kind of lead our department of junior high and high school and collaborate across all of our campuses and work pretty closely with our kids team. And
so
not
is your
in a
role
suburb
more
of Dallas.
Not in a suburb of Dallas. Well, in the same way he is, you kind of are.
Yeah, that's true. We're both.
Is your role central kind of role, or you have a campus role? And
no, I have a campus role. So we have 4 campuses, and the campus that I serve on is our kind of a broadcasting campus. So it's the largest of the 4, if that matters.
Mm-hmm.
But just as in our context, like, everybody does multi-site different. So some are very, very, very franchised, and we are not super franchised. And so we do collaborate a ton. So collaboration and deference are 2 words that get thrown around a lot here. And so we work together on a lot of things and how it looks, but then it's kind of contextualized a bit on each campus, if that makes sense. So.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts on family ministry, youth ministry, how they work together. Like you mentioned, you work close with the kids team and all that. But what, like, if you use the term family ministry, or if you talked about it at your church, what would that mean? I'd love to start there.
Chris, since you're in the suburb of Dallas, would you like to go first?
What does it look like? Suburb of Dallas family
that's funny. So for us, family ministry, when I hear family ministry, Nick, I hear 2 things. One, I hear from the context of youth ministry. I hear the question of, how am I doing family ministry? Like, how am I doing ministry to families? In other words, am I only thinking about the teenager and what I'm going to do on Wednesday nights, what I'm going to do on Sunday mornings, or am I also, and I think in youth ministry culture, a lot of times we would also say parent ministry tied to that as well.
Yeah.
So that would be more like a parent ministry mindset. But I think there's also that approach when you pull out, from that a little bit and think bigger picture. We think along the lines of, how are we connected to children's ministry? How are we launching kids into college ministry? And what does that look like? Now, here's what's interesting for us, Nick, and I think when we've been trying to pull this off maybe for a few months now. I think I said right off the bat, what's interesting for us is this is an area we need to do better in at Johnson Ferry. We're somewhat siloed in a lot of ways, where our children's ministry really does their thing. We really do our thing. College ministry does their thing. And so for us, we're really trying to work towards, and we've been tearing down some walls, trying to improve on communication. One big example is we're starting a family calendar where we're trying to pay more attention to what each ministry is doing, so that we're not planning a big outreach thing on the same night that another kids thing is, happening that would draw from the same group potentially. Mm-hmm. So it's us starting to communicate with one another and plan better with that. But personally, for me, the way I really try to integrate that is if I'm really just being transparent and honest about this thing, for me, I definitely want to keep a strong eye on 5th grade, because 5th grade is the year before I get them into student ministry. And we want to make sure we're working really well with families in that ministry, so that transition from children's ministry into middle school ministry is smooth, and that they have the information, that they need there. And then in college, we're also making some changes as well, where when we're leaving high school, we take this one big trip over spring break together. It's a mission trip to Peru, where our college pastor goes on that trip as well, again, for the purpose of trying to bridge that. But that's the way we impact families. And then just for us, families are just involved across the board in our student ministry. Like 80-90% of all of my leaders and volunteers are parents of kids, in our ministry. So,
yeah. And you lead, remind me, you lead just middle school or middle school, high school together, or what's the?
Yeah, middle school and high school is separate for us. I live in middle school ministry personally as far as my main source. I oversee our entire student ministry staff, but I focus on middle school. But middle school and high school meet separately on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights. And when it comes to trips and everything, there's only really one thing we do together, and that's our what we call D Now. It's like a Disciple Now weekend where we do all that together.
Yep, that makes sense. How about you, Jody? What does family ministry mean, and what does it look like at your church?
Yeah, I think I'm probably, as far as how I view that, similar to Chris in that, and I think it's changed over the years for me. Initially I started in youth ministry super young, and so like I was 18 and a student pastor, and so at that point there was no, family ministry wasn't even really talked about at that point. Even in that, like just in general in the church, no one was talking about family ministry. Parents, I think, were largely seen as like this annoying problem. I needed parents, and so I think parents have always been a huge part of what I've done in student ministry. I needed them initially because I couldn't rent and drive a car, and so I needed them to drive us around places. And so that's the longer I've been in student ministry, and as I have kind of grown, and I think as the church has recognized the need for family ministry, I think that has changed pretty drastically and dramatically over the years. And so in my context right now would be more of like similar to Chris, in the sense that we try to be really intentional in how we are working with our kids team, and how we're transitioning and integrating those upcoming students into our student ministry, into our junior high ministry. For us, we have so we're kind of split as well. We have junior high and then high school, and so here that looks like 7th and 8th for us, and then high school obviously 9th through 12th. And so our kids team has kind of a separate program for our 5-6 kids, and then we do a big event and kind of to encourage those guys to engage and plug in pretty quickly, where we will couple that with kind of a parent meeting, and then we kind of slowly introduce those guys and invite them into a few things leading up to that, so they can kind of get a feel for what that looks like. And then on the back side, out of high school, then we're working with our meaningful relationships pastor, who does all of our small groups and stuff, to kind of help those young adult groups for us pull in those graduating seniors and launching them well into the church as a whole. And then we recruit pretty heavily from parents as well. We try to communicate well, and that's an area we're still growing in here a year in. But just trying to be mindful of commitments and families, and really we just see and we say a lot, like we want to come alongside parents and families and help equip parents to be that a better and more intentional primary disciple maker in their home. And then, like I said, or even as I mentioned earlier, we kind of collaborate across the spectrum for that. Different, like our kids team comes into our Wednesday night programming a couple times. We also really heavily encourage our students to serve alongside their parents in different roles in kids team. And so trying to look at how do we partner with the parent and not just do a ministry for their student, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And you guys both probably spoke to what I think of when I think of family ministry, because if I ever talk to somebody about that, or if they're just asking a question, I want to know what they mean. And for us, it probably means two things, the two things you guys talked about: partnering with parents, and ministries about working with the family. And then the other part is, and you guys kind of alluded to this and how you work together, is children's and student ministry being together. So that, again, maybe not it's the same ministry, may not even be led by the same person, by one person, which that is our context. We switched to that model, I guess, about 7 or 8 years ago now, where it is viewed as one team. And that does help, certainly. But it sounds like you both are in context where one person doesn't lead both. They're kind of different ministries, but you're working hard to do things together. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is for us, for sure. And, Chris was talking about their family calendar they do. We are really intentional as a campus and as a church, but to to calendar all together across all departments. So not even just kids and students, but just to make sure that we're not stepping on each other and competing for each other, and kind of working towards.
Nick, I'm curious for you guys, how deeply integrated is that approach from the standpoint of, do y'all also, even from a curriculum standpoint, like are y'all going all out on that as far as like on a Sunday morning or whenever y'all doing Bible study, are kids and teenagers typically focused on the same lesson or the same, scripture for that day?
Yeah, good question. We don't do that. We use Orange curriculum for kids, and we've used that for students too. Some of it we write our own. Like right now, our church is in a kind of a church-wide series called Devoted, and our adult small groups are doing that. It's kind of, we call it an alignment, where the groups are doing the same thing as what we're talking about on Sunday mornings, and our students are doing that too. So the kids are still using Orange curriculum and all that. So I would say it isn't. I know of churches. I think of our church as Community Christian Church, and we actually got our name from Community Christian Church in Illinois, Dave Ferguson and that crew out there. And they were kind of known for creating that big idea where like you basically can almost teach the same big idea in the service with students and with kids and all the way through tweaking it. We haven't really done that. So all of our alignment or whatever would be kind of beyond the curriculum part. That would be different. Really leaning on the idea that kids and students, with the limited time we have, what can we teach them that matters most?
Yeah.
It's probably not the same things. There's probably a big crossover with adults. There's probably a big crossover with students, but there's still enough that's different that we're okay, taking a different approach.
I like
with each
that.
ministry.
That's good. I think that's important because I don't think it's always going to be necessary that the same. Obviously, kids need things that are different than teenagers, and teenagers need different than adults. And there are certain topics that you're going to need to cover. Well, for instance, like you're going to want to address like social media in some capacity, biblically speaking, and self-identity and, all the identity in Christ and how that ties into potentially social media. That might be, that's just an example that comes to mind, but that probably isn't important for a first grader at this point. Like identity in Christ is important for a first grader, but not in the context of what they're doing on their, TikTok or whatever. So, hopefully not.
But
you never know.
Might be on parents' TikTok. They might be jumping on there and using there.
Yeah,
that's absolutely possible.
Yeah. I think the key also is, and what I would say to listeners is, I don't know that it's necessarily. I wouldn't line up in the area of saying, man, everybody needs to be on the exact same page. Like that's not. I don't have a problem with that being the case, but what I would say is important though is that there is a clear plan though for children's ministry. There's a clear plan for student ministry. There's a clear plan for adults, and that the fancy word for that is scope and sequence. Where everybody knows where they're going, and they're not just playing it by ear each year, and that you've got like a long-term plan, so that you do know how it all sort of is fitting together. That's what I want to do better. Like in our world is knowing, well, this year we're talking about these topics in student ministry, and in children's ministry we're talking about these topics. And, so that, because these are the conversations potentially and hopefully they're having around the dinner table or the Chick-fil-A table. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, stop
definitely.
it.
Chick-fil-A. Yeah. Now,
Nick, you have a Chick-fil-A up there near you, man?
Something you just made me think of. Oh, we have bunches. It's great.
You have bunches? We have one like on every corner here. It's amazing. How about you, Jody? Do you have?
It's probably not that. Yeah, you have churches. You have more churches and more Chick-fil-A's, but at least we have both here. Not in the same quantity.
Yeah. Jody, do you have Chick-fil-A near you anywhere? Jody?
Yeah, it's like about a half an hour away. I can.
Oh, that's not close. Yeah, that doesn't really count as close.
No, it doesn't.
Up there.
So here's what's interesting. I'm thinking, you're talking scope and sequence, and I think, and I've been in contexts in the past where we have kind of a really laid out curriculum map, but we're walking through things, and I love that. I appreciate that. And it's helpful. I agree. Helpful to know where you're going. I think the key for me is being intentional on what you're teaching. So it's not just like, oh, well, let's teach this or let's teach that. For us, our kids team probably has a better defined kind of that scope and sequence than the student team. Our student teams approach this more from teaching targets. So we have like 8 teaching targets that we want to make sure that we hit across the year and across the time that they're in our student ministry. And so everything that we're teaching is coming back to kind of what you're saying, like, oh, identity in Christ, right? Like healthy friendships or relationships. And so I think for me, we recognize those teaching targets and we're mindful of how those intersect with what the foundation that's being laid in our kids ministry, so that they're working together and not against each other, if that makes sense. But I think somebody listening, man, you be intentional. That would be my takeaway.
Do you, because you mentioned those teaching targets, I think about a lot of people who have done youth ministry for a long time might be familiar with like the 7 Checkpoints book with Andy Stanley and Stuart Hall, and they had their irreducible minimums. And we did the same thing. Like we took some of those, maybe used most of them. I think we might have 8 or 9 that are like that. Is that kind of what you did as well? And does that really drive your teaching plan?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar. It's not the same for sure, but it's a similar thought, I think, similar idea to what they were doing. It basically is just like, hey, what do we want students to be aware of and know when they leave our ministry? Like, what are those things that we need to really hang our hat on? And so those teaching targets then come out of that. And then we go then a little step further with okay, why do these things matter? Right. And so when we'll sit down, for example, this coming Monday, I'll sit down with all the other student pastors in a room. We spend the whole day kind of mapping out what is the next few months, if not year, look like for us as we head into 2020 for teaching. And then we'll come back and then we actually outline all of our teaching together. So we're writing all of that stuff ourselves. As a team with those teaching targets and kind of desire, like really what's the clear application and takeaway from all these things as we go. And then our small group, we do small groups as well, and their discussion, they're sermon-based or message-based for us. And so those questions then flesh out after we've outlined the text.
Mm-hmm. Chris, what does it look like for you all?
Yes, I've been at Johnson Ferry for 15 and a half years. And when I got here, they had just started the process of writing and developing their own curriculum. So we're a master teacher type format. Kids sit at the same group with the same group of kids, same leader every Sunday morning. Those are what we call life groups. Like a whole bunch of other places as well. And in a life group, the master teacher will get up and teach some, and then we'll throw it to the tables and they'll talk some, and then we'll teach some, talk some, teach some, talk some. So what we did 15 years ago was the high school pastor at the time had already taken and did scope and sequence, looked at 4 years, what type of Bible study messages. And so to break that down, that would mean, okay, so do we do a topical? Do we do a book study? Do we do a character study? Those type of things. And then he had said, okay, in the 4 years I have a high school student, what do I want to make sure we cover with them? So he'd already developed that for the high school. So I looked at that and did the same thing for middle school and developed that for middle school as well. So now 6th through 12th grade, we've got a 3-year and a 4-year plan. 3-year meaning 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. We just rotate through that series. We call it year 1, year 2, year 3. And we rotate through that over and over and over again. Of course, we tweak them, change the names. We also add to stuff as well. So it's I think my doorbell's about to go off, by the way. Somebody just, I think, walked on our front porch. If it does, it's going to be loud, and I apologize.
It could be like one of those commercials where they get somebody coming to
the insane. So,
This is like, Nick, if you don't know, this is pretty much every episode with Chris.
Yeah,
Every episode, you need a sponsorship. You need
Ring
to get
doorbell
Ring a
sponsorship for
sponsor.
real. Yeah, right. And so
We have some unofficial. We have Ring doorbell. We have
Chewy's is
Chewy's.
an unofficial sponsor.
That's unofficial. Unofficial.
We don't have Chewy's up here. Chewy's
Me
is not
either.
up
Yeah, Chris. That's you talk about the Marco Polos. That's what Chris sends me.
Well, I say
here.
the last one I sent Jody was that we were there, and I zoomed in, zoomed out, zoomed in, zoomed out to the cream of jalapeno sauce, and then I actually made a GIF, and so,
Yeah, and then he sent me both.
Now you can reuse it. It's just the gift. That keeps on giving.
Oh, I like
okay,
it.
all day jokes for days. So anyway, so we change it up, but that's sort of is back on the topic of that whole curriculum, the way we do that thing. I'm trying to keep us focused.
Well, I was interested because one of the things we have done recently, just a couple of years ago, is, and then part of this was a structure change of our student ministry, but our middle school meets Sunday nights. They both meet Sunday nights every week, and they're in our services on Sunday mornings. And then, but the difference is, for the longest time, they both had a weekly large group and a small group on site. You know, it was kind of the same format. But then a couple of years ago, high school shifted to weekly. It's small groups on site for the whole time. I mean, they do a little bit together. There's free time. There's some of those kind of things, but it's basically just small group. And then once a month, they do a large group. But what that let us do, and I guess we could have done this regardless of the format, but we now have like kind of we have a plan with our high school. Middle school is very similar because it's the same exact thing every week. High school, though, because they're doing small groups 3 out of the 4 weeks only, they'll do different things by grade. So 9th grade, we took kind of the things you're talking about. Here's what we want them to know, but sort of divided them up by year even. And again, I don't know if it's good or not. I mean, we'll find out. We're in like year 2. So I was interested to hear how you do the scope and what you focus on. And I feel like this is still very much an experiment for us, but I do like the way it kind of works is like, we'll kick off the fall all doing the same thing in high school, but then the next, season of it or whatever you want to call, they'll be doing their own things that's picked for their, age group by grade, and then come back in winter and we do the same thing again. And then we end and they get to, as groups, they kind of get to pick. The leaders help get to pick, and we have a bunch of options they get to choose from. But we couldn't do that, obviously, when we were doing a weekly large group because everybody had to be taught the same thing.
And what what you're talking about would be a dream come true. Like I think it would be incredible and so good to be able to speak contextually to each individual grade level. Think about an 8th grader and being able to teach and prepare them before they go to high school. So teaching things that would help them and then think along the lines of a junior starting to apply for colleges and making decisions about life. Seniors about to go off on man, that would be incredible. We don't have the space. We don't have the space for that.
That's what we had when I was in Georgia. For our high school, we had we were a Sunday school based kind of model. And so our teaching wasn't master teach. What it was when I got there, and then we shifted away from that. And so each grade then had kind of their own. We had the curriculum map. So 9th grade was learning the same thing every year, right? 10th grade was learning. It took us a few years to get there. So the first year, everybody did the 9th grade kind of curriculum that we had mapped out. The next year, the incoming 9th graders did 9th grade, and then sophomore and above did the 10th grade. And then the following year, right, 9th grade to 9th grade, 10th. And so it took us about 4 years to get to that. And I loved it. The downside to it, if there was a downside, and it also turned out to be a positive, you have to have the right folks in place. But our leaders didn't follow our students. They stayed. So like our 9th grade, I'm a big fan of putting your strongest small group leaders in 9th and 10th grade. When it comes to high school, and then the same for junior high, like those 6th or 7th grade.
6th grade.
I think 9th and 10th grade, especially just from what I've seen and over the years, is like, man, if God is going to show up in a student's life, it's typically going to be 9th and 10th grade. And I think there's a whole lot of reasons for that, but that's another podcast. And so we had our 9th grade leaders, small group leaders, for example, they were teaching the same thing every year. So over time that can get really redundant. But what our leaders found is that, man, okay, I've taught this. This is the 3rd year I've taught Genesis and Acts, for example. Man, I'm teaching it better on the 3rd year than I did on the 1st, because now, man, I keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper, right? And then so we worked we had a progression. Every other quarter was a study through a book, almost like a survey through a book. And then we had an Old Testament survey in there, a New Testament survey along the way. In there, we had an apologetics kind of quarter. We had a cults and world religions for our seniors. We had some practical things for our seniors, like, hey, here's how to manage your money, your time, and those types of things, and some leadership stuff built into our junior year. It was good, man. It was super, super effective. It wouldn't work in my current context because of how we function or how we do student ministry now, but it worked really, really well there. And man, I loved it.
Yeah, it's still an experiment for us. We'll see it's here too. It seemed good last year. And again, I don't know if it works the model, you have to do small groups in order to be able to teach it that way.
Right.
So we'll see. I don't know if we'll do it forever, but I do like being able to specialize it that way by grade. And we took our best shot at just, hey, we feel like this is a better 9th grade conversation. We feel like this is a better 11th grade. Because some of them are obvious, like you were talking about life circumstances. We do a different plan with seniors on top of this that helps prepare them for what's next. That seems obvious. That's the easy one. But when you're deciding between, different theological topics or whatever, it's like, I don't know, is that a better 9th or 10th or 11th? Sometimes it wasn't simple, but we're like, okay, let's try this.
I get that. And so for us, some of that just came down to a progression. Like, okay, if we want them to learn this before they leave, they're going to need to learn this first, right? Like it would be helpful to have a good understanding of the book of Genesis before we dive into anything. And so it was like Genesis out of the gate. And then if we want them to learn about the New Testament, man, an understanding and overview of the book of Acts would be helpful before we jump into the epistles or before we jump into. And so that helped us shape some of that. And we tweaked it along the way too. Like Chris said, every now and then we'd sub things out. Like I can't remember what we started with, but like we came back a couple of years in and we're like, man, our kids really need to understand how we got the Bible and why they can trust it. So we plugged that into 9th grade. But it was good. And then for us, our kids were in the service too. Now our context now is quite a bit different. And so we actually have no student programming on the weekends on our campus. All of our student programming happens on Wednesday nights. So we do large group and small group in one night for us. And so our small groups are all divided out, like a normal small group by grade and gender for us. And then our kind of student worship time, we're all together for the worship portion, but then we split for the teaching junior high and high school. So we can still be a little more targeted. It's a little bigger spectrum because I'm teaching to all of high school and our junior high pastor's teaching all of junior high. But with the small groups kind of coming in to supplement that, it really helps. It helps us be intentional there as well. And then we also we just finished up, you mentioned this too. Every fall we do a church-wide series that the church is doing together. And so we come alongside that with them as well. So they're hearing a similar a message in that. It's not the same message, but it's similar. We sit down with our teaching team as the whole church and kind of align that. And then even for the adult small groups, like our questions are bound in the same book as the adults. We just flip it. So if you flip the book over, the students are there. So even again, trying to draw that connection back to parents are able to see also what their students are learning and talking about within that same resource for them. But then we'll just finish that up, and then the rest of the year we'll kind of be
That's good.
back on our
That's
own
good stuff.
scope.
Hey, so I have a question, Nick. I'm curious. You still there, Nick?
I am. I'm ready. Waiting with bated breath.
You sound like Jody. Okay. Listen, my dog's growling. Dory, hush. Good grief. Okay. So Jody and I, of course, we do the Longer Haul youth ministry podcast. And ultimately, for Jody and I, our heart is ultimately tied to, hey, how can we help youth pastors experience longevity, both in their current context, meaning they don't just go in for a year or two and then they're having to leave, but also from a long period, man, if you're thinking, man, I feel called to do this long term in my life as well. And so how do you think family ministry plays into that? And I don't think we're going to have a hard time connecting this dot. But I asked that from the context of, I think a bunch of youth pastors that I've known over the years, some are very open to that mindset of being not siloed, but open to family ministry and open to others. But I've also known quite a few youth pastors over the years that have been very siloed, been very much like, I only want to do my thing. I only want to do, everybody else can just do their thing, but we just want to do our thing. Even to the point where also you see some youth ministries who like are blowing and going, man, they're like growing and experiencing tons of growth whenever other areas of the church might even be struggling still or whatever, but they still are siloed. So how do you, when I throw all that out there, what kind of comes to your mind, Nick? And Jody, of course, you can jump in on that as well.
Well, I think so. The connection between the longevity and family ministry, it's a good question. When I think of longevity in youth ministry or in ministry in general, I probably don't think of family ministry at first, but maybe that's because I've never thought about it from that angle. It's a good way to think about it. I probably think about it more from fit with a church. Again, I don't know why average tenures at churches for youth ministry are so low. I mean, all of us could have certain theories, but I do know one thing I see a lot in church world is churches that aren't being completely open about their church when they're trying to hire somebody, and then candidates who aren't being completely open about themselves and not asking the right questions. And so you end up in a setting that, I mean, I can't tell you how many people I talk to that are like, man, this is not what I thought. And I knew this, but didn't know any of this. And it's just so different.
Yeah, sure.
That probably stands out the most to me. But I think in terms of family ministry, I do think if you could have that mindset that like, I'm here to help serve families in this church and families outside this church that we haven't even reached yet. And you're passionate about being there and watching those kindergartners become middle schoolers and middle schoolers graduate high school and things like that. We just had a guy speak at our fall retreat who's been doing it for 23 years at one church. And I just said, man, that's got to be amazing because the life change that he's seen, the generational impact, the faith that has been transferred. I mean, obviously he's going to feel old when he's doing weddings, for his, kids that have been there since they were born. But that's just something you don't see a lot of. And I do think if you think with a family ministry mindset that these middle schoolers, let's say, aren't just my responsibility now, that I was praying for them, when they were dedicated as kids, maybe, and I'm going to be celebrating and praying for them as they go off to college or whatever's next after high school. I don't know. That probably does help you think more about staying long term. But then again, when I think about why people leave, I don't know that it's a family ministry or it's a model type of thing. I'm not really sure. I don't know. What do you guys think?
No, I think so. I think a lot of it depends on the church, even like you're saying. So much of it, I think, is the right person in the right spot and being open and honest about ministry philosophy. And I think, I've said forever, we joke about it a lot on our podcast. Like, yeah, we were experts at marriage until we got married. We were experts at parenting until we became parents. And so I think I would almost even say the opposite is true as well, that longevity helps family ministry. The longer you're in student ministry and the longer you're in one place, the stronger your family ministry becomes. And I think that's kind of a culture maybe that the church builds, and then the church brings in kind of people that are on board with that. I know, like, man, and Chris could attest to this as well. When as a student pastor, when you're in a context where you've seen kids come all the way through your ministry and out, that's a super rewarding thing. I was in a context even prior to Georgia where I was kind of overseeing youth and children. And yeah, I saw those kids, man, all of those kids in that student ministry who had came to Christ underneath my ministry in some form or fashion, because I had literally watched them come in from, to the children's ministry all the way up through the student ministry and out. And there's a really healthy thing about that. And I think it increases, I think on the other side too, it increases your effectiveness as a student pastor. I remember Jeremy Lee at parentministry.net once asked me to think of like the top 10 kids that I had in my student ministry, like the kids that I'd put like, your all-star team for over the years. The kids that you hope every kid would kind of be, where they get it. Their walk is genuine. They just love the Lord. And so, I kind of came up with that list, and I would say this to anybody listening, like, think of those kids that you would have in your list. And then he said, how many of those kids didn't have parents who were engaged and involved in your ministry and discipling in their homes? And dude, like, I couldn't think of any of those kids. And I'm sure it happens, right? Not saying it doesn't happen. But when I think of the kids in my ministry who are probably what we would all hope every kid would be, all of those parents are being intentional in the home, and all of them have a vested interest in the student ministry. And so over time, then, as you stay put, longevity builds credibility and trust. And that happens more and more and more and more. And so I think it's kind of a two-sided coin. If you're doing that well, you're going to stay longer. But if you stay longer, you're going to do that well. They kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Jody, I think the key.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, Jody, I think the key to what you're saying, though, is that there's a mindset, though, on the front end of being committed. I do agree with you that longevity can equal better family ministry, and a better ability to do that well. But what I'm maybe wanting to pull out even a little bit more, though, is I think, though, the youth pastor that is willing to make this a priority will have a better chance at experiencing longevity at a church.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, well, it would be a basic question. When people think about a youth pastor at the church, and they say, hey, how does old so-and-so feel about the church? Well, if their answer is, well, he's great and kids love him, but he's pretty much only interested in what's happening in student ministry, versus he's great, kids love him, and he clearly loves our church, or she clearly loves our church. It's a subtle mindset type thing, but what I think ultimately it goes back to is, I'm not just interested in the success of what's happening in middle school ministry and high school ministry, but I also want to celebrate the victories that are taking place in children's ministry.
Yeah.
I want to be encouraging and supporting, and not always walking into a staff meeting only interested in guarding my area and fighting for my area. It's, those calendar meetings where you both want to do something on the same night and somebody's going to have to give. Well, not always being so dogmatic that you're not willing to see what they're trying to pull off as well. It's all that little, and I think what happens there is, long term, it equals, a person who is willing to go into this thing saying, man, I'm interested in the overall church as a whole. I'm interested in the families and how it impacts families. I just think it's going to lead to a healthier relationship with the church. It's going to lead to a healthier youth pastor, and it's going to lead to longevity, which is a really major win.
Well, you definitely would feel more church ownership, right? If you're working with,
of course,
other ministries and all that. And then, Jody, something you said that I didn't even think about. You mentioned our kids, like we're better parents and marriage. Yet we were perfect until those things were part of our life. I didn't think about this, but the other probably factor in this is you're going to be more likely to stick. Like, imagine if I'm a youth pastor and my kids are in preschool and elementary ministry, and it's a great ministry and it's really serving my kids well. I mean, I'm going to want to be there even if I didn't work there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that would be my church. Like, my kids are
there you go,
preschool and elementary age, and if I didn't even work there, this is the church I'd want to attend. Same if I'm a children's pastor and my kids are in student ministry. Like, my preschool director, her twin girls just graduated, and hopefully she looks at it like, man, I'm so glad my girls got to be a part of that ministry, and I'd want to be here. Even if this wasn't my job, I'd want to be here to, while they're still in middle school, high school, to finish out at this church. That's something I never thought of.
Okay, so let me ask this question, Nick, because I think I 100% agree with what you're saying, but I also know that there are people listening who aren't in a context where they would say, if I wasn't paid to be here, this is where I would be.
Oh, yeah.
What advice do we give that person?
I'm a very to the point kind of person. Don't beat around the bush. I think you gotta move on. I don't think any of us, and again, I'm probably not the best gauge of this because I grew up in a great church that was amazing, and my youth pastor, I still get to talk to him. He's in the area. He pastors a church. He's a great mentor to me. But there's definitely a lot about my church, especially as I got older, as in college age or whatever, where our church just didn't make enough changes to continue to reach the community. And again, nobody wanted this, but we were more about who was there already and not who was not yet there. And so what I would say is the way I approach it, and again, I feel bad saying it this way, I think you got to figure out, where is God calling you to? Is it time to move or not? But in general, when I think about the mission God has for all of us, and I think about my life, I want to be used up well. And so I don't want to spend time at a church where the visions and the strategies of it could be the theological alignment, whatever it might be, is not going to be a good match. Whereas I could maybe find a place where that could be a good match, and we could be arm in arm working together on God's mission. We're not always going to agree with everything. We're definitely not going to always get what we want. But I feel like I shouldn't say it this way, but I'm pretty bold about saying, find the best fit. Like, don't stay at a place. If you are at a church where you wouldn't attend that church if you didn't work there, one, see if you can help change it. I mean, that's what we did in the church I grew up in. I wasn't even staff. And then if you can't, okay, is there something else is there another church where you could serve and that'd be a better fit? And I do believe God calls us to certain things in certain seasons. I don't think that's always like every single person is called to this church at that time. And if you don't go there, that's a mistake and you've messed up God's will. You know what I mean? I think it's a big church. And if you look at it like one big church, there's lots of places that you could serve and be used up by God in a big way. And so being a match, I think, is an important thing.
So I think we obviously, like, the longer haul is our podcast is trying to encourage longevity and not just longevity in ministry in the sense that you would do this for a long time. That's certainly a piece of it, but also that you would do it where you are for a really long time. And we acknowledge, though, I mean, I've said already in this show, like, I've been where I am less than a year. So clearly we are okay and would acknowledge that there are moments when, yes, it is time to move on and leave. And we've done episodes on that on our show. We have some resources that we've given out, like, hey, here's 7 reasons that you should leave the position you're in. And so we wouldn't disagree. I think for me, it all goes back to the start, in the sense of, like, man, when you are looking and evaluating of whether you're going to step into a position, be mindful, be prayerful, lean in, man. Yes. Listen to God where He's calling you to be. It's probably going to be uncomfortable. It should be a step of faith, but use the brain God gave you as well. Make sure that you align on those important things, because if not, you're going to find yourself a year in, 2 years in, rubbing against something and then feeling like stuck and looking for whatever's next. Chris, what are your thoughts on it? About
leaving and when to leave and how to, is that what you mean? Like, y'all said a whole bunch of stuff there. Yeah.
Yeah. Just like, if you're in if you're in a spot and you're sitting here and this isn't where you would want to be if you weren't being paid, like, what advice?
Yeah.
Do you
Well,
have
I think Nick hit on it earlier, man. We've got to do better jobs as youth ministry people to, when it comes to interviewing, and both the church needs to do a better job at interviewing people, and people need to do, and then not settling, going somewhere where they're like thinking they can go in and change everything, super quickly. You got to be honest about where you're going and whether or not it's the right fit. But yeah, of course, there's moments where you have to change, because it's just simply not going to work out, or it's not healthy for your family, and it's costing more than it's gaining. The balance there that's hard is there are days where Johnson Ferry's a challenge. There are days where, I'm sure y'all's churches are a challenge, but it doesn't mean it's not the right fit. It just means that it's work. It's hard at times.
Yeah.
So I think trying to figure out the when do you dig in and do your job versus when do you realize, man, this is just not the right fit kind of thing. So, but no, I think that's wise. So I think ultimately for me, though, the thing that I love about what you're doing, Nick, with your family ministry podcast is simply raising awareness to the fact that an overall approach to family ministry really is important. And I do think when it comes to the longer haul, what we do, that one of the keys to that is making sure that you're not just focused only on yourself and student ministry, but that you're realizing you're supporting others, also.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And like we've talked about, I do think that helps you stick. And I don't think, obviously your podcast about the longer haul, that's really what we need is we need more people who are going to stay. But I think it's like you guys said, a lot of that happens on the front end, asking the right questions, not settling for something, being more in line with the church you're going to come on board with. But I don't know. And maybe I don't know what you guys think. Some of it is if you can agree with the church theologically, vision, strategy, everything else, you're not going to agree on. That does. It's just like we would all do things differently if we were in charge, so to speak, and we'd ruin some things we don't even realize. We would mess some things up. We'd probably do some things well. So if the big things are in place, though, and we can, come to grips with the fact that we're not always going to love everything, I think you can really stick through all kinds of stuff. Like there'll be lots of decisions that you don't like.
Oh yeah.
But if you agree on those things, then you'll be fine. You know what I mean? And you put your kind of yourself aside and your ego and all that. I think you can stick. And because you're right, I do think the problem, I see it with a family ministry perspective. Children's ministry people are usually there for a long time because most of them are homegrown. It's their town. It's their church. They were there before you were, kind of thing. Student ministry is the opposite. A lot of student ministers come in from the outside. They're outside hires. And so it's a little bit more normal for them to move to another church. So it is kind of funny seeing that when you look at the whole picture, how different it is in each of those ministries.
Yeah. No, and I think we've gosh, I don't want to curtail us again. We've gone probably long enough, but I always just tell folks, man, if you're a year in, you're frustrated because you're seeing things that are starting to be obvious and annoying. 2 years to 3 years, something's going to happen and you're going to want to leave. And that's when most do. But man, if a student pastor can just stick it out, when you hit 4 or 5, it gets so good. You start seeing momentum. No one's comparing you to the last guy. Parents trust you. Like that, this whole aspect of family ministry gets better, clearer, easier. But I think there's a moment where we have a rule. We kind of joke around with our staff, like you're allowed to quit once a week. You get once a week, you can quit, and you get the whole night off. But the next day you come in, right? The next morning you have to show up. Mm-hmm. And so even like what Chris is saying, man, I know we've had a few midweeks this semester that have just been insane. Like why are we doing this? Who chose this? And then we've had other nights that are like amazing moments where we want to celebrate and see. And I think that's just life in ministry. And so, but longevity on both sides helps. I think we would say. And it is interesting though, because you're right. Like a lot of kids folks come in and I've never really thought about that difference in role.
Yeah, and in larger churches, it'd be different. But certainly the vast majority of churches that are under 1,000, lots of children's ministry people are from the area. I call them homegrown, like it's their thing. That's me in our church. I didn't think I was going to work full-time in vocational ministry. Ended up wanting to help a church plant start. They needed to hire a children's pastor. It's like, sure. I'd mostly done student ministry as a volunteer. And this is my town. Like this is where I grew up. I was born in Virginia, but lived here since I was 2. And so I'm probably not the person that's be inclined to looking for God to call me somewhere else. I would do whatever I feel like God is calling me to. And that's a common thing I see in children's ministry, not so much in student ministry because, and then things are changing now, but for years you would hire just like almost pastors out of colleges, out of seminaries, and that means people are moving, to take a job there. And to kind of shift gears a little bit about helping people stay, one of the things that probably happens, I don't know, you guys could probably tell me more what you think. I just don't think people talk enough about the issues they have on staff at their church. They just get bitter and sit on them as opposed to having healthy conversations about, okay, why do we do this? What's the reason for this here? Have we thought about this? You know what I mean? And that way we understand and can relate to each other more when there's, decisions we disagree with. It seems like a lot of people just don't talk about it and then leave,
No, I think that definitely happens. I think there's a lot of, and we've talked about, man, your relationship with your pastor and how important that is. And I think whether you're in a student ministry role or a kids role or just an overarching next gen role, that communication is important.
Yeah, agreed. Yep. Well, I know. I'm wondering, Nick, if we could all maybe just sort of, we're probably. I don't know how long y'all normally go on your podcast, but we're probably getting close to the end of when we would normally go. If folks are listening and they fall into the category of, hey, I love the idea of doing better, but how could I do better in family ministry?
Family ministry?
Yeah. Like what are some things we might could throw out to the folks listening both to your podcast and to ours about just some basic steps to maybe kind of do better, when it comes to family ministry? What comes to y'all's mind?
Well, I'd love to hear what you guys say too, especially with the youth ministry angle that you have, because I feel like, and again, maybe you can speak to this, but I would say most people I talk to, most leaders, they would say that partnership with parents and families and all that gets harder as kids get older. And some of that's parenting, in some ways gets harder as kids get older, and connecting with parents. And there's a reason that like my kids' PTA in kindergarten was full last year and, senior year is not. So I would love to hear what's working for you guys with family ministry and connecting with parents and stuff like that. I would say for us, some of my favorite things are our transition events. So like when kid goes from preschool to elementary and there's something for them and their parents, we call it upgrade. We put the whole thing under the banner of upgrade. So, and we move up kids and students at the same time. And in our context, we do it at the end of summer, just because our student ministry doesn't meet in the summer. And so if we promoted them, coming out of the school year, we'd be pushing them into nothing essentially, or not much. So we put that under the banner of upgrade, but that is one of my favorite partnerships with parents because they actually show up, they're in the room. They have questions because things are changing, right? They're going from elementary to middle school or whatever. And so those are certainly one of my favorite things. I think parent focus groups, again, a lot of times we don't even know what questions to ask or what they need. So that's been something for us in partner with parents that I think has been helpful for sure. But my favorite, I say our best partnership with parents is our small group leaders. And we, even though it looks different, we have small group leaders that are weekly leading kids from age like 3.5-ish all the way up through high school. And so we get to kind of, even though again, the context is different, but the role is the same. I feel like those leaders are our best partnership with parents, and some do it better than others. And we could certainly do a better job equipping them. Like we've done things where we write a template email and give them the list of the, parents of the kids in their group, and they can email them to start the year or to, in January or whatever. And those things are really helpful, and they can even reach out. So those are probably some of my favorite things. We have like a strategy for connecting with parents, but I think my favorite things have been those transition events, small group leaders, and what they do. And then recently we've done some more parenting classes. I wouldn't call them groups because they're probably a little bit more like classes, but they go 6 weeks usually. And at the turn of the year, we're actually going to do a bigger one where, like, let's say it's Wednesday night. Every parent will come Wednesday night. We'll spend some time together for 20, 30 minutes all together, talk about something that matters to all, parents of kids of all ages, and then break out into preschool, elementary, middle school, high school. And those conversations are just amazing because I think for parents, I think of me, for myself too, as a parent, it's great to know you're not the only crazy one. You know what I mean? Or you're not the only one that has something, that's struggling with this, or, my kid's not the worst, or whatever. There's just something about that. And I feel like parents do parenting alone too much. So that's probably some of the things that we've done that I've enjoyed the most in terms of family ministry.
I think of two things whenever, for our listeners that might be thinking, man, I need to do better. I think one for me is check your heart first, and I don't mean that in some like big kind of, you may have a dark heart. Oh my gosh. And I don't mean like a major way, but But simply, what are your priorities? What's your philosophy about this? And just do a gut check on how you really feel about parent ministry. What are your tendencies when it comes to family ministry, as far as how do you feel about what children's ministry is doing? How do you feel about what preschool ministry is doing? How do you feel about what's happening in big church? All of those things. And if you have a tendency to not be supportive of all of those other areas, I think that's the starting point, is to just change your mindset a little bit and be more aware of that. And then I would say the second thing to me that is just an easy opportunity. If you're really not doing much of anything related to family ministry and bringing parent ministry into that as well, thinking along those lines, just start something. Like a couple of things you said, Nick, maybe have a parent meeting every so often, or maybe start another thing that came to my mind was, like, as a youth pastor, are you sending out a weekly or a monthly parent email where you're telling them and keeping them informed about upcoming dates, but you're also maybe throwing out a couple articles to them that might help them in their parenting process? But maybe not even that. Just do something, though. Show up to a kids event that you're not really running, just to support them. Just do something. That would be a couple things for me, I think, if folks are listening and they're like, man, we need to do better at this, that would stand out. Jody, what about you?
Yeah, I would say, man, just choose to believe the best about your team and your kids' team and your parents until you can't, right? And I think sometimes we can get really kind of bent out of shape over small things that turn into big things, but even because of that resentment that we had earlier, or because, I think a lot of student pastors tend to feel like kids' team is like the most resourced. They always have all the volunteers because the kids are cuter, they smell better. And so,
well, at certain ages they smell better.
That's true.
Young enough, I'm not sure about that.
And so, like, just choosing to believe the best. I think, like you're saying, show up at kids' events and be present before they get to student ministry is really, really helpful. How can you support and work together? Being mindful of that. When parents, as far as it comes to parents, we leverage parents and invite parents in to serve as small group leaders, and we also are intentional to provide a lot of different opportunities that parents can plug in, not just a small group leader. And then throughout the year, like maybe small things like helping to provide transportation or helping provide snack for something. We call those on-ramps, places to get parents like on-ramped into serving into our ministry. And in the past, we've had parent leadership team where just a advisory board really of parents that I would meet with pretty regularly. That was parent led. I kind of sat in and just to help make sure that we were meeting the needs of our parents, that we were really effectively partnering with our parents. We've done parent retreats where we take the parents and not the students away, just an overnight thing, which have always been super fun. I think, there's a lot of ways to do it. But I think to start someplace, man, you've got to invite parents into the conversation. You've got to work alongside and not against your kids' team. And yeah, I think just doing something, if you're not doing anything, is better than doing nothing, right?
I have another thing I thought about that we do. Our student pastor came up with it years ago. It's really easy, I think, and we're doing it again in a few weeks. He just does coffee talks for parents before the student ministry gathering. Now, you can't do this in certain settings, like if student ministry meets on Sunday during services and there's something right before. But in our case, it's Sunday night, and like I think some of you have that model. Then he'll do, so if it starts at 5:30, coffee talk will be at 5. It'll go till 5:45, so it'll push 15 minutes into the beginning of the program, but that's free time anyway. And what we do is we get our small group leaders come, and that way they're connecting with the parents of the kids in their group. And then we do 15, 20 minutes on like some kind of parenting topic that is high felt need.
Yeah.
Like imagine, hey, we're going to talk about technology and your teen. But again, it's like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and the other 20, 25 minutes is just them connecting with their kid's leader. And man, that has been so easy.
Oh, that's great.
And yeah, we don't get 80% attendance, you know what I mean? But you serve the ones that come well, and it's been really good. That's been an easy win for us.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, we talk a lot here. Like, I've always heard the 80-20, right? 20% of people are going to do 80% of the work or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about the 60%. So we would assume that like 20% are going to be there no matter what you do. 20% probably won't come no matter what you do. And so that 60% in the middle, how do we move that 60% in the middle? So I think, man, I love that idea. Actually, I'm going to steal that for sure.
It's been an easy one for us. We did it. There was a season when we first launched it. We did like 4 in a year. And I do feel like they got a little, like it lost momentum.
Yeah.
But then when we brought it back and have done it less frequently, and I think part of it is the hook, be as intentional as you can be about whatever you're going to share with them. And it's just practical too. Like we try to, is like, hey, use this, here's a great resource. Here's something that's helpful. Now we haven't done this, I don't think, but off the top of my head, the other thing you can do is have the small group leaders email the parents that week. Hey, I'm going to be here. Love to see you. I mean, it's hard to say no, right, to the volunteer who's helping your kid. I don't even know if we've done that, but that could be a way to boost attendance if you feel like you're not getting good participation.
Yeah. I'm just always amazed anybody shows up to anything we do. I mean, with all that fights for their time and attention, I'm just like, gosh.
Yeah. I think that's one reason that this has worked because, it's 30 minutes earlier. Like, and in the end, it's the same time frame. It's something you're already used to. You just come 30 minutes earlier. We're usually offering more than coffee. We'll have some kind of dessert or food or something like that. But anyway, that's been good. It's something I hadn't even thought about until you guys were talking through some things there.
Oh, that's great. Chris, any last thoughts?
Nothing on my end. Feeling good, man. Nick, this has been fun. Thanks for having us on your podcast, man.
You bet. Thanks for doing it. I love talking ministry in general, but specifically youth ministry. I'm always intrigued to hear like different models. What are people doing? How connected is it, within to families and to children's ministry and all that. And so thank you. I love hearing different ideas and having you guys on the podcast to talk about it.
Yeah. It's been fun. We'll have to do it again.
That'd be fun. Right. That'd be fun. All right. Nick, do you have any farewells that you typically give your crowd?
No, well, not really, because we wrap with the interview, just say thanks, and then I usually end up recording something else anyway afterwards, which nobody listens to. So it's great. You know how that is.
Yeah, of course. That's right.
That's amazing.
Cool.
That is amazing. Yep. Well, good deal, man. Awesome.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, man. We appreciate you. Appreciate you letting us do it. This has been fun.
Cool. All right.
Yeah. Thanks.
We'll talk to you guys later.
I love being able to mix it up sometimes and have a conversation with more than just one person, as much as I love having a conversation with one person and really interviewing them and diving deep and learning from them and their experience and their setting and context and all that. It's fun to talk with two people, and especially two guys like that who've been doing student ministry for a long time, have that connection and chemistry together, and then just talk about family ministry as it relates to youth ministry. And here are a few action items I thought of coming out of that interview. One would be to evaluate your family ministry, which again, you may not even use that term, but how you partner with parents, how you work together with children's ministry, student ministry, like how well that looks like one thing. And I do think those are two distinct things, but evaluate both and just talk about, and maybe you'll pull some volunteers in or some parents or some other staff and evaluate that. And then I think another action step would be to meet with your counterpart. If you lead in kids ministry and you're going to talk with a student pastor, or if you're a student pastor, you'll talk with a kids ministry leader about how you can work better together. And then I think the third step would just be to create an action plan together so that you can strengthen your family ministry, your partnership with parents, and how well you are aligned. I think that'd be 3 great steps. That's not easy, simple steps. Usually I try to suggest some fairly easy steps. Those would not be easy or quick, but they would be really helpful, really helpful for your church and for your ministry. So you can get all the links and notes and all that at nickblevins.com/episode 170. But thanks for listening. I'm excited because now in the next number of weeks, we're going to kind of have a series of podcast episodes that are coming out of the Volunteer Boot Camp, an online event we did in the summer with Ministry Boost, where we talked all about recruiting volunteers, onboarding, encouraging, training, empowering, retaining. Like those were the 6 big topics. And what I did was we didn't get to all the questions that came up in that live event online. And so I've had each of those folks that we had present come back on the podcast to answer some of those questions that we didn't hit. So that's going to be a fun series. It'll be 6 weeks long. And they're basically Q&A about volunteer recruiting or onboarding or whatever the different topics were. And we'll also play a snippet from what they shared in the online event in case you missed that. And we'll give you a link where you can watch the whole thing. But I'm excited for that. So that's going to be a kind of a series. I don't think we've ever really done that on the podcast before. That'll kind of be like a series coming up, which will be a lot of fun. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that or any episode. And thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing. And I'll catch you next time as we kick off that series on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.